Hi everyone, my name is Megan Kazneski and I work as a threat intelligence analyst at S&P Global.
And my name is Aaron Katz, and I'm the Director of Cyber Defense at S&P Global.
Wow, Aaron, that sounds like a hell of a lot of buzzwords. What does cyber defense mean?
Great question. In addition to managing buzzwords at the company, I'm also responsible for heading the vulnerability management, threat intelligence, incident response, security operations center, and security automation and orchestration functions.
Well, that's a lot, but none of that sounds like security awareness. Why are you giving this talk?
It's another excellent question. Really, really insightful. I'm glad you asked. The important part here is that we are not part of security awareness because we are part of marketing and branding for information security, building a culture. That involves every single individual, not just your awareness team. Your awareness team are fantastic partners to set the stage, to set your program, set the foundations. But if you want to establish a culture, it's important that every single person from information security can champion that culture of security, that can help educate, that can help inform. It's important, especially now when you see that developers, business analysts, vendor risk teams, everyone needs to know about security at this point. Investors are not really going to open their wallets anymore without asking how you're securing the data, how you're securing their data, the customer's data. So it's important to partner with your awareness team, but make sure that every single person that's a subject matter expert is able to deliver a training and to enforce and educate security training throughout the company.
A brief note to everyone listening, because there are two of us, we have a little more flexibility. So we're looking at the Discord. If you have any questions, please feel free to toss those in there. We'd love for this to be more of a conversation. So if you have questions as you have them, toss them in there. We'll do our best to respond during the presentation, but then we'll also respond to questions at the end if there are any, or you can always message us on Discord as well. And so the idea for this talk, this marketing and branding for InfoSec, building a security first culture, came out of things that basically we were missing. About 4 years ago, S&P's security team was 7 people. And in the last 4 years, it's moved up to 45 people. So in the last 4 years, we've grown from not having a particularly big security team to quite a large one. While the size of the company hasn't really shifted, it's been about 25,000 people the entire time. And while 45 might seem like a lot, again, we're still looking at protecting roughly 25, 26,000 employees. And the other thing that happened during this shift was we moved from a very distributed operation. S&P used to be a series of divisions, all of which handled security and IT operations by themselves. And over the last 4 years, that centralized into one security team. And those two shifts drove a huge change in security, because when you only have 7 people for a company of 25,000 and you're only handling some general questions, often people don't particularly care about security, or they don't even realize that there is a security team. They don't know who to contact, when to contact them, or how to contact them. And so as we grew and as we had more resources, we realized very quickly that we needed to expand that as well. A lot of people have a negative opinion of security teams. We're seen as MORDAC, the preventer of information security services, if anyone's seen the Dilbert cartoon. And we realized that if we wanted to change that opinion, we'd need to do so from the ground up. It would be really important for us to build buy-in, not only from your average end users, but from your developers and particularly from your executives. Often I think building buy-in sounds like kind of these buzzwords that we throw out there without any real context. But the key here is that getting buy-in, getting executives on your side means more money, it means more resources. Technical controls aren't enough, because the least technical person in your company, I guarantee, can find a way around your proxies if they really want to watch porn. Like, we've all found that, we've all seen it happen. And because of that, the technical controls aren't enough. You need policy. We rely a lot on policies and procedures and people following those policies and procedures and consequences if they don't, to secure our systems. And so getting that to happen requires the people who are actually supposed to follow the procedures to understand, what that means and why they should follow them before we get there.
If you want to find out what's wrong in your company about a lot of the vulnerabilities in your company, talk to your users. You're going to get some great insight if you ask an analyst, how are you browsing the internet and how are you getting around these controls? They're going to find a lot of these bypasses because they feel that they're being stifled, that they're not able to do their job, and they have to find these workarounds. And the problem is, at the beginning, you have that kind of adversarial relationship. If they're if they never talk to security except when something's bad, there's no real incentive for them to raise those issues. And the idea for this talk of marketing and branding, building a security culture, is that we want them to come forward and identify that this is potentially a risky practice, and how do we work with security to be more secure while also ensuring that the business can get the job done. And this is, I think, is really important. Every security team that I've talked to at some point or another asks that question: why don't users care about security? If it wasn't for our users, we're going to be extremely secure. So in our own company, our phishing rates pretty much sucked. There was no prioritization or concern over vulnerability remediation. How many times do you see a news article where they talk about this year's old vulnerability was exploited and that's why they got hacked? I've not really met a team that really has every single one of those patched, but we had a real bad lack of prioritization and concern. We also had a very poor understanding of just basic cyber hygiene. As an example, only 30% of Americans actually know what HTTPS means. Only 24% of them know what private browsing is. So when we see a lot of people trying to watch porn in the office, we see that they're trying to watch it on private browsing, not realizing that we're still able to see it. So why do we have a lot of these cases? The biggest issue that I've seen is that we have a big overestimation of user knowledge. We think users understand more about security and the reasons behind it than they actually do. And part of that is that we overestimate how much our training has actually sunk in. If you're only doing an annual training, or if it's somewhat sporadic, it goes in one ear out the other. They click through, take the quiz, and move on with their work. They're not really absorbing those lessons. And the worst problem is that a lot of times they won't understand the context of why security does what they do. At a previous company, when I first joined and I said, there's a ton of vulnerabilities on the system, how do we fix it? I was told, oh, they don't let you patch it because it's super critical to business, $5 million in revenue, they're not touching it. All it took was me giving a phone call to the business representative, explaining the risk, and all he asked was, that makes sense, can you please patch it on Saturday so it's less impactful? Explaining the context and taking that time so they understand why it's important and how it helps the business is critical, rather than just getting a directive from the security inbox or taking a training once a year.
So we talked a little bit about the problem. We've got basically an overestimation of what users know by the security team. We've talked about the fact that we're overwhelmed and that we're trying to, secure a large amount of space, and you have limited resources, which is whether people, money, whatever, everyone's going to run into some kind of resource constraint. So our solution was branding and marketing. It's almost like magic. And a couple things here, one of which is that we are lucky enough to have a security awareness team. And if you are, that's awesome. However, when I say team, I mean one person, and that person is also responsible for e-discovery, which means they're quite busy. And after they run monthly phishing campaigns and they put out an annual training, they basically are out of bandwidth to help us. And so the other thing is that that's sort of why we first got involved in security awareness and training, changing culture. The thing that helped and the thing that continued to keep us involved is that we found that when we had the sort of topic experts or subject experts as the people on the stage giving presentations, talking about what we learned, those things helped a lot, because it meant that if someone asked a question, you could give them an immediate answer rather than having to say, I'll get back to you later, or check out this blog. It also allowed us to give a lot more tailored presentations, so we could talk directly to specific groups and specific patterns. And we found that that was really important, so that we were not just, the problem with an annual training, as we all know, is that it's so watered down as to be not that helpful. It asks questions like, if a strange man comes up to you and gives you a USB drive, should you plug it into your computer? Even under normal circumstances, the answer to that is probably no. And so those trainings are sort of helpful at a general level, but they're not helpful in actually changing the culture of an organization. And that comes from a number of steps. So in this presentation, we're going to take you through a number of the things that we've tried over the last couple of years to change the culture from the bottom up. We'll talk a little bit about whether or not we think these things work virtually, and how we can adapt them to be in sort of a more adaptable remote working environment, and also how much effort that they're going to take, whether that's resources or money or just time you have to spend on it. And because this wouldn't be a security presentation without referencing MITRE ATT&CK, we've structured it like that. And we'll start with winning the hearts and minds of the people, initial access. How do you get people to first pay attention to you when the only experience they've had with security is either someone screaming at them in the middle of an incident saying, I need you to take your production system offline right now, or the annual training? So we started with presentations, and this to us, we were actually invited to give a presentation a couple of years ago to our CIO and his leadership team because we just started our threat intelligence team and he didn't know what that was. So we gave a presentation, we talked about what threat intelligence was, why it mattered to the company, and what we could do for him. And that turned out to be a really illuminating conversation because we had executives in the room who were able to ask questions that maybe they'd been concerned to ask before. They asked us, what is the dark web? Are we worried about the dark web? How do you get on the dark web? And those type of questions started getting us both more familiar with what our executives knew and also gave us ideas for how we could better structure it. And in fact, the presentation went so well that we were then able to give a number of presentations, around 10 to different offices or divisions and teams throughout the company over the next year. And we'll talk a little bit about what made those so successful, but part of it was that just we were able to tailor those presentations very much to that group. A second thing we did was direct outreach to leadership. So this took the form of a lot of different things. Basically, whenever we needed support for a project, rather than sending a general email, we'd reach out directly to a lot of the leadership teams. So for example, our head of application security wanted to get off the ground a program to teach developers how to code more securely. So we reached out to all of the heads of the development teams and had one-on-one meetings with them, got their buy-in, convinced them to nominate developers from their teams rather than asking developers to self-select. And that was important for two reasons. One, it got the developers both feeling as though they'd won a prize rather than they'd been forced to take additional training. And it also showed that there was top-down support for this kind of initiative, that this was a value of the company and that people should care about cybersecurity, even if they didn't.
And the last item that we want to talk about was our town halls. And most companies have something like this, whether it's a town hall, all hands meeting, group meetings. In this case, we were asked by the CEO, who runs a town hall every quarter, to just explain security and why it's important to the company. So this was hosted in person in New York, but virtually streamed to every single one of our locations. And in that discussion, I went through, why do we care about security? What does the company do? What does security do to help the company and enable them? And then I went through specific incidents without going into too much detail so the lawyers wouldn't get me in trouble, but actually exposing, here's the attacks we see. Here's the number of malware events we had to deal with. And here's the cases where we didn't have the right mitigating controls. We went from seeing people kind of slouched down, not paying attention, to just sitting up, eyes open, and people realizing sometimes that, oh, he's talking about my application. That's why we had to take it down over the weekend. They get to see that impact and understand that it's not just something you read about in the news that happens to someone else, but why we care about it, how it's important, and more importantly, what is their role in protecting the company.
There are a few things that we find that make these presentations really successful, and that's, as Aaron alluded to, real world impact, follow-up, and a personal connection. The first is that real world impact. For all of the presentations that we do, we talk very honestly about incidents that have happened at the company. We talk about why they happened, about how they happened, and what protections we've put in place since that. We talk about, the real number of attacks we've seen, the real number of phishing emails we've gotten, things like that. And a little bit of it's the scary thing, but a lot of it we find is that for most people, cyber is this sort of thing that exists as like this monster in the closet. And it's always going to happen to somebody else. They don't realize that it could happen here, that in fact it is actively happening at our company, that we're seeing attacks every day. And that's to us the most important thing, just making that tangible and making them understand what the real world consequences of those kind of attacks are. The second thing that we do is we always ensure that there's a very clear follow-up. So regardless of what the presentation is, we're very clear that no matter how excited people get, they have something tangible to do. Because if we don't immediately harness that energy from a presentation or a training and they aren't asked to do something immediately, we tend to find that people don't pay as much attention or they lose interest very quickly. And so that goes along with something that Aaron and I do before we give every presentation, is that we figure out who our target audience for this presentation is and what we want them to do. So if we're giving a presentation to 200 employees and 50 of them are developers, we might decide that the thing that we want to happen is for those 50 developers to sign up to our application security champions program. In fact, we almost don't care what happens to the other 150 people in the room. And it sounds a little counterintuitive, but we find that focusing more on a smaller subset of whoever you're talking to or training or giving a presentation to, and asking them to take a very tangible action afterwards is much more effective in the long run than getting everyone in the room generally excited about security. Yay, it's a thing. We should do something about it, and then not knowing what they can do or how they can participate in the company. And the last thing is personal connection. So we find that figuring out how this ties back into people's personal lives is really important, and how that this connects to their company. In fact, this is our chance to sort of make it fun. So we often like to make fun of people, or, you know, in my case, I like to make fun of Aaron. This is actually a slide from one of our previous talks that we gave to a bunch of company executives, where we took a number of executives and we walked them through what cyber threats are. We talked about what cyber criminals are, what nation states are, what an insider threat is. We made it kind of gamified. We talked about what those targets are and how they do it. So it's a relatively basic introduction, but the thing that we married all of these to is that we talked about the threat, and then we talked about a real world example of an incident involving that threat. Either something that had happened at S&P or something that was in the news that they would have seen that they could relate to. And tying those two things together, we find really helps people, because thinking of like the black hat hoodie hacker is a scary thing for a lot of people. But thinking about, you know, an insider threat all of a sudden makes it more tangible. You can start to think through they can start to think through who those actors are, what they want, and it helps them really make that concrete, which helps them care more and understand more about this.
Yeah. And as Megan said, the real world impact is extremely important. Making sure that you could tie it in so that you can relate to the audience. When you have your users understanding that these headlines can potentially be them, and it could be because of an application they worked on or a decision that they made, it helps strike home. And granted, some of this can really smack of FUD, fear, uncertainty, and doubt. And you don't want to leave it there. FUD is important to show where do we go from here. The most impactful part of this slide to our employees was on the top left, that item that says Duke Energy was fined for $10 million for cybersecurity lapses. Duke Energy didn't actually get breached. Their cybersecurity governance was just so bad that they were fined preemptively. So now we have our employees realizing that they've been taking shortcuts, but they've never been called on it because there's not been a breach. But now they see that regulators are taking notice, the world is taking notice, and you have to make sure you're building on cybersecurity hygiene rather than just bolting it on at the end so you can avoid a fine. It's extremely important to make sure you hammer home that impact. Don't scare them too much or you'll drive them away, but you want them understanding that there is an actual impact for the work that they do.
Now that you've won their hearts and minds, how do you stay there? And how do you persist? So there are a couple things that we do: a daily threat brief, security role models, and a see something, say something campaign. The first one, our daily threat brief, kind of doubles down on what Aaron just talked about. It's exactly what it sounds like. We publish a daily threat brief on articles that we've seen in the news, breaches that have happened, things that we think are important for people to know, and it goes to between 200 and 300 people in the organization, largely executives, but also some folks throughout the company who have signed up for it. Admittedly, this is a pretty high resource intensive task. It takes an analyst about 3 hours a day to put this together. We also publish a weekly threat brief, which takes less time. And sometimes we'll do individual blog posts on our company intranet site, which also take a lot less time. And the really big benefit to this is a couple of things. First of all, it lets us move from being reactive to executive questions to proactive. Now, when I get a question from the CFO that says, so-and-so got breached, oh my gosh, are we vulnerable? What can I do? Do we need to make changes? Typically, by the time an executive finds out about it, we've already sent something out. By the time a breach hits the Wall Street Journal, if you're in security, you probably already know about it through a trust group or honestly from Twitter. And so we've already written something, and we can say, hey, 3 days ago on our threat brief, we said this about the breach. Here's what happened. Here's what we can do. And this has proved valuable in a number of ways. We've had people from our compliance department tell us that this brief has helped them answer questions from regulators. This has helped introduce us to the folks who are responsible for M&A at our company, who are now integrating security into the process before we do something, which is nice. We've also had people from our vendor management team start to integrate things they've learned into vendor discussions, or when they enter into new supplier discussions, or even the folks who work in the business saying, this has been helpful for when I talk about cyber risk externally and how we value that at our company.
Yeah,
this is a really big one, but it's also supplemented with our weekly threat brief and blog posts we'll write. So we, like a lot of people, subscribe to have I been pwned alerts for our domains. And so whenever we get notifications that a large number of our employees have been impacted in a breach, for example, the Marriott breach or EasyJet, something that they would have likely encountered through work, we'll publish blogs on our internet site, we'll send out emails. And a lot of this is just the concept of building a relationship with people before they have to interact with you in a negative way. As Aaron said a couple times, if the first time someone's hearing of you is when you're screaming at them to shut something off, it's not going to be a great relationship. But if they've already gotten to know you, they're like, oh, you are the people who write these briefs. You're the person who told me that, my credit card was involved in an EasyJet breach and now I need to replace it. They might have a more positive relationship here. And that's a lot of what this is doing, is sort of proactive branding and marketing to tell people who you are, what you do, and how they can reach out to you, so that even if they don't necessarily read a brief every day, they at least know where to go to get more information and who to talk to get that information. Yeah. And the second thing ties back into the follow-ups we just talked about. So security role models. Whenever we leave a presentation, we ask people to model good security behavior. It's really important when it's executives or leadership teams, but it's just as important when you have end users or developers. If you can convince them to model good security behavior, if you can empower them to feel like they're an extension of the team, as though they're part of pushing the company forward, that can be really powerful in getting people on your side and convincing them that this is an important thing they need to pay attention to.
Yeah, and the See Something, Say Something campaign, which we've kind of modeled after New York's campaign, if you see something suspicious, say something. We created a form, takes almost no time, and users can submit either with their contact information or completely anonymously any type of security concern that they have. If they're worried about something their manager's asking them to do, thinking they're taking a shortcut to meet a deployment deadline, if they just observe anything suspicious, they're able to report it. We make sure it is not about blame. It's not about coming down like a ton of bricks if something's wrong, but it's how security can help fix and help prevent an issue from occurring. Every single presentation we do, there's one giant slide at the end that always has the name of the campaign, an easy to remember URL, and an email address, because what's really important is making sure they have an easy way to connect. Megan talked about how important a follow-up is. One follow-up in every presentation is engage with the security team. If you have a question, reach out. If you see something, reach out. It really helps hammer home the persistence, making sure people know that the team is there, that they're responsive, that we're not a team that's only going to come after them, that they can actually start that dialogue without worrying. And this campaign has actually been used before when people have read those threat briefs, read about certain issues, and then they submitted saying, hey, I just learned about this threat, and it seems that we might have an issue too. What can we do? So it helps tie it all together and make it a little more cohesive and build a better relationship with our users. So let's talk a little bit about lateral movement. How do we actually get people to now start talking to each other, to work with each other, to spread the knowledge throughout the company? So the first item we'll talk about is internal collaboration, which is a nice flowery sounding buzzword, just like synergistic management solutions, whose domain is already registered. I tried to buy it. But internal collaboration, what we've ended up doing is after some of those presentations, we then reached out to our public affairs team who manages our internal, external communications, our PR, relationship with regulators and entities. And they invited us to speak at their offsite to all of their staff. We ran a tabletop exercise, but instead of doing a generic incident response exercise, we made sure it was tailored with their team, and we worked closely with them to build that program. So when we ran the exercise, they got to see how important crisis PR might be in the event of an incident. If a researcher posts online that ransomware hit our company, they're going to need to be prepared very quickly to respond. And they didn't really have templates before. They didn't really think about what's needed from the cyber side. So having that engagement collaboration led to a lot of work products being created, templates, procedures, processes that they just never had before. We've delivered training on business email compromise to some people who at first had thought that they had never received a phishing email in their life and that no one would ever go after them. But they worked on our procurement team. So we made sure to educate on why it's important, how to identify it, but then also what happens if a customer was breached and someone is spoofing our brand to get information from a customer to get them to send money. They come to us yelling, and we have to make sure that our customer engagement personnel are trained on how to respond, what the issue could potentially be, and who to talk to. It's extremely, extremely important. And we talk about this a lot. You have to reach out, be that person that reaches out to other teams, learn what they do, and learn how security can help them and be an enabler. Shift that mindset from security as a cost center to security as a value add, to the point where we have had our sales representatives actually now talking about security initiatives as a way to sell our products.
And internal collaboration can sometimes sound kind of fluffy, as Aaron said, but the really important thing to remember about this is it doesn't necessarily require a lot more effort than things you're already doing. The difference is that you're doing them, but maybe set up a couple of proactive conversations. So, the same thing we've been harping on here is that, call up for example, your physical security team, have a chat with them, get a conversation going much before the incidents happen. So when coronavirus hit in New York, well before that, when we realized coronavirus was going to be partly the threat it is now, our physical security team started having a working group. They want to talk about which offices should be closed, how do we close them, how do we proceed, how can we make sure everyone is safe as they move home. And they immediately offered a couple of seats to our threat intel team. They asked us to be involved. They wanted our input from the beginning. And that's the kind of outcome we're looking for here. It's that because we'd already built a relationship with them, and because we'd had a lot of conversations with them about, hey, this is what we can provide you, how can we support you, what are your intelligence requirements, what can we do for you, that then we were invited to have that seat at the table when it mattered. And those kind of relationships, as Aaron is saying, are really important, building those in advance of when you want to be invited to the meeting, so that when whatever the incident is happens, that you're invested in them and you're involved in those conversations. Because sometimes just getting the right seat at the table and being invited to the right meetings is unfortunately so much of us being able to get our job done and being able to get our messaging out. And again, this goes, our next one, employee resource group, kind of throws back to the personal connection part. So I'm not sure if you guys have them, but our company and a lot of other large companies have what's called an employee resource group, which are groups for employees to get together. They run events. They're a lot more informal often. The bad thing about giving a security presentation is even if you give the world's best security presentation, no one's excited to be at your presentation. They're already dreading being there. There's a good chance that they won't intake a lot of that information. And even if they do intake that information, they're probably not that excited about it. But if you can go meet them where they're already at, for example, with an employee resource group where they've already volunteered, this is something they're spending their free time to do, and you can present and work with one of these groups, then you're getting people sort of when their guard is down a little bit and they're more receptive to your message. So we have quite a few employee resource groups, but one of them we've worked with pretty closely is a group for parents. And that's enabled us to give presentations on, how to protect your kids online. How can you protect yourself so that what they're doing online is safe? How can you use, sort of some privacy software around them? What should and shouldn't you post on social media? And especially in the time where we're looking at a lot more remote workforce, having employees who understand how to secure their home networks, someone who understands what an IoT device is and maybe how to deal with it, and also how to update the firmware on your router, things like that, which people, no one wants to learn how to do, but often when it's framed in terms of, hey, this is how you can protect your kids, or this is how you can protect yourself at home, rather than seeing it as a work commitment, can really help people. It helps them to, understand why these things are important and understand what to do. And, particularly when everyone's working from home, it's really important that you have a secure home work setup. But even when you're not, people who practice good cyber behavior at home are more likely to bring that behavior into work. And so enforcing those habits as much as you can, it can be a really good thing. And in addition, it's another chance for you to sort of help people out. You're trying to help them protect their kids or to protect their families online. This is another chance for you to build a relationship that's positive, that, now they like the security team, hopefully. They want to interact with them, they want to learn more, and they feel comfortable reaching out to you. whether it's about this, whether it's about something really serious. A lot of times after we give these presentations, I get 50 emails asking me for a password manager recommendation and one email telling me about a really important security concern. And to me, it's worth it, because if I have to wade through these 50 emails and tell people that I want to use this password manager, then getting that one security concern is really, really important, and to me is worth the sort of relationship we've built there.
Yeah, and what's important to think about is, like, you're hearing this theme a lot about building a relationship. That if you have one takeaway, we talk about our outcomes presentation here, your homework is to find someone in a business, find someone outside of the team, and just strike a conversation, learn about what they do. The act of you being present at a meeting or at one of these events, talking to those groups, you already get people talking, remembering your name, remembering your team. Next time something happens, it's easier for them to recognize. One of the exercises we did with an employee resource group, which is called Valor, which is for our veterans, they were hosting a tabletop exercise with West Point cadets. And they wanted to have a cyber element as part of the tabletop exercise because, as Megan pointed out, we started building that relationship with the team. They invited me over and we started working out, how do we build a cyber element to the tabletop exercise that was extremely well received. We got a lot of positive feedback from the general, from West Point cadets, and from the people that ran this, to the point where when they have other events or other groups, they reach out to us early on rather than kind of tacking it on and asking us later.
And the last thing here is security champions. Security champions, I will warn you, are both a lot of work and a huge investment of resources. So I think most security champions programs can be broadly categorized into two groups, both the sort of general user awareness champions, which is where you're asking essentially anyone to join and you're providing some basic level of training. And then you're asking them to help out with activities, generally often security awareness type activities. There's probably not a huge requirement on them. And then the second part of this, or the second most popular kind, is an application security champion, which is typically run by an application security team. It's for developers. It's a very formalized program where there's a series of steps. And then at the end of it, they're often enabled to do their own code reviews to, sort of remove some of the load from the security team. And they're seen as essentially an extension of the security team. And so we have one. We started it a couple of years ago. We have two tracks. One is for our application security, track, which is for developers, and one is for our, everyday folk, anyone who wants to join. And they have roughly quarterly training. We provide a little bit of training, and they can help run some exercises. For example, we had a group in India last year where we were running some security escape room themed trainings for all of the employees in the area, and we had security champions in who helped us out to run that exercise, and that was really helpful for that. The application security team works to create a more formalized program, which, as we said, helps enable developers to lift some of the load from the security team. And this one's a little more informal. And honestly, this isn't something that I think is a strength of ours. This is something we're still working. One of the things that we didn't expect when we created this program was how much people would want to join it. We thought, maybe we'd be lucky if we could get 20 people to show up in a room. And it turned out we had hundreds. And I will say that if you're considering starting a security champions program, have a lot of resources in place, because I think these programs can take anywhere from a couple hours a month if you're offering quarterly trainings to a full-time dedicated person if you have a program that continues to go on, or a very formalized program with a lot of requirements.
Yeah, and as Megan mentioned, the escape room training, and that was actually a really great example of the champions coming together. People started taking the security champions title essentially as bragging rights. They were talking to their friends, I'm a security champion. This is really cool. This is what I'm doing. They were really excited helping out with that training, helping with the questions, learning about it, being involved. A lot of times, back to one of those first slides where we think users don't care about security, taking aside that exception few that may not care, people just need to be educated. They want to be involved and they want to be consulted. It's much easier to spread the security knowledge, to build that culture, if you include people and empower them. The benefit of that application security side, where we will teach the developers how to actually perform the scans themselves, it gets them more interested. We've had developers reach out saying, I know you guys find cross-site scripting or SQL injection flaws. I want to learn how I could do that when I develop, so we don't have to wait till the end and consume cycles fixing it. I want to learn. People are curious and they want to learn. And I think one of the areas where we definitely have to improve on, as Megan said, is building that out, because we have so much interest. So it was a lot more time commitment than we had initially thought. If I was going to do it over, I may think of targeting just smaller groups, using them as a pilot to incubate it. But the type of passion is there. It just takes the outreach and empowering those individuals to get some great results.
And this is the area from which we've learned a lot from our peers. For example, Geico has a fantastic security champions program for your average end user. We've talked to folks at Veracode who have a really great program for application security teams. And I think this type of collaboration and information sharing on security champions programs can be hugely beneficial. We definitely have some space to grow, but it's something that we're very actively focused on working on, since we think it's one of the best ways to both build that relationship and also physically reduce the load on the security team.
Yeah. And to that point, there was a question that came in through Discord that I think does relate about how OSHA trainings have evolved to create a safety culture, and can we learn? So what I think is really important, the Office of Safety and Hazard, it's really, really important to build that culture. And the way that they approach trainings is training management, training individuals so that it trickles down, it permeates every part of the company. That's what your security champions really are going to do. They are going to be the backbone of that culture shift, where you're empowering them to make secure decisions. You're backing them up, you're enabling them. You're not hoarding all the tools for yourself, all the knowledge for yourself. You're sharing it out, you're teaching them how to fish. And they appreciate that, and then they spread that knowledge on throughout their own teams. So we are really excited seeing where that's going to go this year.
Finally, now that you've won the hearts and minds, how do you stop being so much of a cost center for the business, and how do you become a value add? So this is going to vary a lot based on your company and what it is that you do. For us, we have a division called S&P Global Ratings, which, for those of you who are not familiar, they rate the likelihood of companies, countries, municipalities, and places to pay down their debt. So their goal is to tell you how likely that someone is to default on their bonds or their debt. And a couple of months ago, after one of the rating analysts had attended a training that we'd given, they came to us and they said, you know what, we're seeing a ton of municipalities in the United States have made ransomware attacks. And quite frankly, this is hugely damaging to their credit, because they're forced to either pay ransoms or pay huge sums to consultants, or to revamp their security program, or in some cases to completely overhaul their IT infrastructure. And they said, we don't understand what questions to ask. We don't understand what answers they should be giving. And quite frankly, there's a lack of understanding of some of the technical components of ransomware. So we did training for the ratings analysts in one of our business divisions, and we talked to them about what ransomware is, about how it impacts municipalities, and came up with a set of questions in concert with them that they could ask municipalities to assess sort of their security posture, and some information so they could understand the responses they get back. So they would understand, not only what kind of protection should someone have in place against ransomware, but what does that mean? And that was a really big shift in our turning point for us, because it was the first time, we had this relationship where not just do we have a relationship with, a physical security team, which broadly has the same goals as us, or, a relationship that's directly relevant to what we do, but rather we're actively helping the business side of the organization. And that's something we harp on a lot, but is really, really important. We actually have, a series of people come in and talk to us about what it is that the business does. We work for a very large, complex financial services company that has a lot of different business lines and does a lot of different things to make money. We think it's really important for the security team to understand how the business makes money at a very concrete level, because that helps inform our threat model. If we don't understand what they're doing and how they're doing it, then we're not going to understand, what information is most important to them, what their crown jewels are, and what kind of threats they're worried about impacting them. And so that's something we focus on very heavily, is to understand where the business is coming from and how we can add value to that.
Yeah, and that's a really good point about understanding the business. As an example, if you're the New York Stock Exchange and you're trying to tell them, well, you have an application that is cross-site scripting and that's listed as a critical vulnerability. the tool might list it as critical, but if that's an internal only system and they tell you, we have a problem over here with latency, and if this server takes too long to respond, we have to close the market for the day, they're going to care more about that than they are about the cross-site scripting. So it's important for you to understand how they make money and the context of the business so that you can give more accurate and informed guidance, which helps build that trust with your customers, with your business entities. And what we've also done to help kind of share out the knowledge that everyone's gotten is external conferences. And I'm not talking about Megan and I presenting at something like this. I'm talking about our business leaders who attend different conferences in the course of their day, whether it's at the World Economic Forum or any other areas where they talk about market intelligence, they talk about how our data affects the market or different trends we're seeing. They can now apply a security lens to it. Security has permeated everything. If you're an investor, you're asking questions about security. So they are now taking the steps to learn about it and how it impacts the market, how it impacts buying decisions, mergers and acquisitions. You saw with the acquisition of Yahoo by Verizon, the breach information knocked down their price by millions and millions of dollars. Making sure that our executives are able to talk about this, that they're giving presentations and they're seen as thought leaders and trust and that they know about security is extremely important and one of the best wins that we've had. And what I want to take some time to talk about is what outcomes did we think we would actually have from giving these types of presentations? Because like most security teams that I'm aware of, and definitely myself at times, we have a very cynical outlook on life. We don't think things might get better. We think people aren't going to try. And to be honest, for some of the presentations, we initially thought it's going to be another presentation. It's a PowerPoint. People will listen because they're told to and they'll move on. That actually wasn't the case. Instead of people just slouching around on their phones waiting for the talks to end, we had so many more user questions, users reaching out constantly. To Megan's point earlier, 50 people are messaging about password managers or security concerns. That's 50 more than we had before. We're spreading that message. We're working with them. They're asking questions about how do I use a password manager and how do I think about using it at home with my family when I'm signing up? The fact that we had a CFO ask us about credential stuffing attacks and learning about what those were was huge. We never had that before. We're really increasing our collaboration with different teams, working with different groups, talking to people. We try to get in our daily meetings every other week. One of those meetings gets repurposed to allow someone from either outside the company or within the company to be a guest speaker, build relationships, to help us learn what are other people doing, how can we fit in and help. We've actually affected some policy changes. So Gregory Madden yesterday talked about potential needs for consequences when it comes to phishing. If people fail continuously, if someone fails 11 out of 12 times in a year.
We've had that happen.
Yeah. When that happens, we now have HR and compliance came to us about we should probably have consequences here because doesn't that put us at risk? So now we have, if you fail too many times, you're going to have a conversation with your manager, with HR, potentially be put on a performance plan or other disciplinary measures. We're going to finally have some consequences for the people that keep trying to watch porn in the office. I don't know why they don't think we can't see that. People that try to connect their personal devices onto the network because they want to run BitTorrent. It's important that we're affecting that change in policy with partnership through risk, compliance, rather than us trying to force it down. And then we've had a lot more opportunities for trainings. As Megan said, we've done this probably at least 10 times, that initial training. And we sometimes still do variations of that. We have other members of security, such as the application security team, that's hosted capture the flag tournaments, that have hosted just secure development training workshops. There's a lot of opportunity, and the security awareness team are great partners to help arrange these, but having those subject matter experts available for advice, answering questions there rather than taking it after the training has happened, has been invaluable.
So where are we going from here? To enlightenment and beyond. Basically, the things we're working on over the next year are, as we talked about earlier, our Security Champions program. We'd like to strengthen that. We'd like to make it a little more formal, to find more ways to leverage our security champions to support initiatives. That's a really big one for us. And the other big one is our phishing program. As Aaron talked about, we've implemented consequences, and we've also started doing a lot more targeted training. We've decided that we have some more time now and a little more resourcing to figure out what works best. And so what we did over the last year was launch a number of spear phishing attacks against divisions. And we first looked very closely at what type of phishing emails we're receiving. So we based all of the spear phishes we sent on emails we'd seen. We were seeing a lot of typo squatting of our domain, so we started buying our own typo squats of our domain to use for phishing tests. We'd also noticed we had a lot of executive spoofing, so we started spoofing our own executives. We mocked up our logo, mocked our signature block, did a lot of background research in order to create them. And then we sent them to we sent 3 increasingly difficult phishes to both our finance and our operations team. And what we found was that the people who fell for the initial phishing emails were actually less likely to fall for subsequent phishing emails. In fact, they were actually less likely to fall for any more phishing emails for the next 3 months. After about 3 months, the effect dropped off. And over the same time period, we saw reporting rates go up. So the people who'd been involved in our experience or in our experiment, which were a couple hundred employees, reported roughly 25% higher rates than the rest of our employee population. In other words, sending the phishing emails and them actually falling for phishing emails meant that they were much less likely to fall for both real phishing emails and subsequent tests, as well as they were more likely to report suspicious emails. And we found that this was really important for us. And we want to continue doing these types of tests throughout the business to see what type of training works best, how we can improve these programs. And these are not included in our phishing consequence management, and they're sent out individually to departments. But we're hoping to expand some more of this as well, and just to see what kind of training works best. And the thing we found is most important too is that when we're crafting spear phishing emails, that spear phishing emails are incredibly reflective of what we're actually seeing. If you're not seeing typo squatting domains, don't typo squat domains. But then we also have when the education pops up and an email goes out to them afterwards that says, hey, here's why we sent this. Here's the real fish that we got that we based this on, and this is why this is so important. And again, it's sort of connecting this back to this real world impact that we find is very important. So people can understand when we're launching these phishing emails, we're not out to get you. We want you to learn. We want you to have some space to fail, which is what the spear phishing emails are, as apart from our general phishing. And also we want to be able the training to be more targeted and more real world, so it's actually relevant to what people are doing. And that we think is really important.
Yeah, we're also working a lot on, and it's going to sound boring at first, but on our logging capabilities. No company I've seen logs everything the way they want. But through our partnerships with the different groups now, we have a lot more buy-in and support to get the logs security needs to do their jobs, because by going to the messaging team and saying, we need email logs, and also if we had those, you can access them so your troubleshooting will be much easier and you can do your job in easier fashion. They're suddenly on board, and now we can't get the logs fast enough. So building out what we can do from our monitoring side by engaging the right teams and actually collaborating them, asking them what they might need, what fields are useful to them, what are their use cases, and having that shared access and platform has really helped just improve our relationship with the teams to the point where they start suggesting stuff we didn't even know we had and helping us automate a lot more. One of our goals was to improve our automation this year. Everyone talks about it. Some people will buy expensive SOAR products, or developers will create some really cool PowerShell scripts. But at the end of the day, for your automation to really work in a security team, you still have to work with all the other teams in your company to understand what's valuable, get access to those systems to make the changes, and make sure you're not disrupting the business too. I saw in the chat, funnily enough, that someone had to block porn and then they had to unblock it for business reasons. I've actually been in that situation before too at a previous company, because some of those studios were actually customers of ours. But figuring out how do we block selectively, how do we ensure that access to some of the sites were allowed so that if someone sends out information, they can look up something accurate, but stopping the people from blocking, we had a valuable lesson in our own company. Someone kept trying often enough, and when he stopped showing up in the logs, our thought was not that he didn't do it anymore, but that he found a workaround, and that actually helped us improve our security by finding the bypass that he found. So we're using a lot of these lessons and these relationships and what we're seeing to just kind of bolster the program and make sure that it's a cultural shift we're making, and it's not just something we're trying to do in our own silo. And with that, we have a little bit of time. If there are any questions, please feel free to post into Discord. While we post, we will answer, but we do have a little fun game we want to play. We've done this in our old presentation. This gets a lot of great feedback just because it's engaging. It gets everyone thinking, and it's fun.
And if you have comments, things that have worked really well for you, things you've tried as far as getting security awareness more attention, let us know. If not, we like to play a fun game we call Who Wants to Be a Cybersecurity Extraordinaire? It's based very closely on Who Wants to Be a Millionaire, except that there's absolutely no money at the end of the day, and you have to get stuck with me instead of Regis Philbin. With that, let's get started.
So users are, and please enter these into the Discord, assets, the enemy, useless, or security experts. Don't be shy, people.
Otherwise, it'll just be us talking to ourselves.
I mean, we do that anyways, but all right. I did like the B and C over there. And the answer is assets.
So if you were paying attention earlier, the percentage of Americans who know what HTTPS means is A, 0%, B, 59%, C, 30%, or D, 46%.
And we know everyone was paying attention then. Right.
And the answer is C, 30%.
And the last extraordinaire question, also testing knowledge from earlier, is the percentage of Americans who understand what private browsing means. 0%, anyone who works in InfoSec, 54%, or 24%. Lots of votes for 0 over there. Well, the answer is 24%.
Great, you guys all are officially cybersecurity extraordinaires. Thanks for playing our game. And then with that, if anyone has any questions, comments, things to share, drop it in the Discord. Otherwise, you can always find us on the Discord chat. We'll be hanging around for the rest of the conference. I'm at Meg and Aaron is at Pendragon87, or you can reach out to us via our emails or find us on Twitter. Yep. Aaron's at Pendragon. My name is at Megan's Doing Fine. Please reach out to us. We love to talk about, how we can build a better security team. If you have suggestions for how we can improve, I want to hear it. If you have things that have worked for you, awesome. I want to hear those too. Things like that. And I think we got a question. Do you work with your physical security team to develop any kind of overall security training? Yes and no, and I'll let Aaron chime in on this as well. So most of the time when we do physical security training, it's in response to specific things. So for example, we do, for COVID, we did a lot of joint work. So we talked about both the physical threat as well as the cyber threat, hey, let's talk about phishing emails. Let's talk about working from home. And there are a lot more concerns. We've also worked with them on other things. We work with the physical security team to develop sort of country risk assessments. We work in a number of countries around the world, I think like 160 or 170. I could be off on that. But whenever we create those or sort of presentations, when we talk about what the risk of a country is, we work with a physical security team. So they'll talk about the physical risk, the political and economic culture, and we'll add on, whatever we have about cyber to add on. If there are any concerns specific to that country, cybersecurity laws we need to be aware of. And there'll be other trainings where we'll do joint work, often when it's location related. You know, if we're seeing a lot of threats against an office, when we're talking about smart offices or smart devices, or even just physical access to the office. You know, we all know that if I can jump into your building and plug into your network directly, it reduces a lot of time for me. So on those issues, we work very closely knit. And we have regular conversations with them. We've actually talked to them. So they have, like, we have priority intelligence requirements, which are basically the standing requirements for the threat intel team. And we have some that come directly from the physical security team that we monitor for, and continue having a conversation with them about throughout the year. Aaron, anything to add? Any specific things that spring to mind?
Yeah, I think there were two really important not necessarily trainings that we've done, but we've interacted very well with them when it came to, as you mentioned, tracking some unrest near offices. During the Unite the Right protests in Charlottesville some time back, we were providing pretty much daily updates on what we're finding through open source intelligence and other platforms, because we do have a pretty major office there. And anytime, and that's an example, but any other location where there are issues, we do try to provide them information. But one of the best joint trainings that we've done, and we actually had someone from the FBI come in as a speaker for one of them too, was around how to travel securely to hostile nation states. We have business in a lot of countries. There are legitimate business travel reasons for people to go to Russia, to China, to Iran, but we don't really trust a lot of the security measures that may be there. So how do we travel securely? How do we make sure from a physical standpoint, as well as a cyber standpoint, what do we need to be aware of? And as a result of that training, we ended up also creating a burner program that was in pilot phase. And then once COVID-19 hit and all travel was suspended, we haven't really had a chance to use it that much. But the burner program was a really excellent collaboration between the teams on how do you determine when someone needs a burner and what type of burner, whether it's a device we can wipe or a device we need to just throw out afterwards. So that was a really great training.
And we've also done follow-up interviews with executives after they come back from travel in certain countries that we'll do jointly with the physical team. So we'll talk both about, you know, a lot of questions about where your device is at any point out of your control, and also a lot of their questions about, you know, do you see anything unusual? And we'll usually do those in concert. A lot of our physical security team is pretty practiced in doing deep, in-depth interviews and interrogations. And so we'll help work very closely with them for those kind of exercises as well.
Awesome. And with that, again, as Megan said, we'll be on Discord the whole conference. Our Twitter handles are posted in there. Please feel free to reach out. We're always happy to help. We talk a lot, we know. Happy to inflict that on others.
And also happy to learn, you know, if you've got a really great idea.
Awesome.
We actually do Cybersecurity Month. We didn't talk a lot about that, but we do a couple things for Cybersecurity Month. We do an information campaign that goes out. Last year we did a sort of phishing campaign. So we did 6 increasingly difficult phishing exercises that didn't count toward our consequence management. And everyone who caught all 6 of them, we mailed them a security tumbler. I wish I had one, but they said 0 clicks given, I think. It was very cheesy. But so we mailed out prizes to everyone. And the benefit to us is that then, you know, people keep the security tumbler, like the coffee mug on their desk, and then it sparks more of a conversation. And we'll do some other things. We try to leverage our security champions in that case to do events for their offices, which we find really helpful as well. Sort of local events as much as we can.
Awesome.
Awesome.
With that, thank you very much.